Yo, what is up, guys? Emergency video today. We've got the Kyrie Irving trade. We're going to talk about all the fantasy implications of that move. But before we get into that, if you guys could drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and also, if you don't have an Underdog account, player props, we've got the Super Bowl coming up, NBA through the season, best ball drafts, use code CANYON. Link in the description to get 100% deposit match up to $100. But let's put all that aside and get into the move. We just got a report, Woj and Shams reporting the Brooklyn Nets are trading Kyrie Irving to the Dallas Mavericks for Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, a first round and multiple second round picks. Obviously, it was a move, maybe not this move specifically, but Kyrie being moved was something we were kind of expecting. Obviously, right, we saw the reports that he was talking about free agency in the upcoming offseason, wanted to be moved before the trade deadline. It looks like that is happening. As far as an impact for Kyrie specifically, I think, we've seen we'll see the value decrease a little bit from his opportunity to perform without KD. Obviously, a ton of usage we've seen in this stretch without KD, who we expect to be out for a little bit, getting reevaluated. But, still, we've seen Kyrie average pretty much 24 plus points per game, since his last season with the Cavs back in 2016. So I wouldn't overreact or freak out too much about Kyrie moving to such a ball dominant usage monster in Luka. A guy like Dinwiddie, was averaging pretty much 17 points, 5 assists, and 3 boards with Luka this season. So obviously you add in a guy like Kyrie, I wouldn't overreact to his fantasy value falling off a cliff or anything. Luka's really, really ball dominant, but Kyrie's played 4 seasons with arguably the best scorer in league history, maybe in Kevin Durant, and he still averaged 26 plus points per game. So I wouldn't freak out too much. I still think Kyrie's going to be able to replicate the value he's had for most of the season. I don't know if it'll be as great as we've seen in some of these games without KD, but still, I think Kyrie will still continue to be solid.
Yeah, and I think it's similar with Luka too, even though it's a little bit unprecedented, this move as far as Luka's impact for fantasy, because we haven't seen him get someone this good on his team, right? No disrespect to the Jalen Brunsons, the Porzingises, or guys like Dinwiddie, but Kyrie is just clearly the best basketball player that Luka has now been able to start to play with. And so we don't know what that's going to look like. But again, I don't think we would overreact either, because we've seen splits of usage with guys like Kyrie and KD, who are also 2 big usage guys. And it's still Luka's team, right? This is still the face of the Dallas Mavericks is still Luka. He's still going to get his usage. He's going to have those huge nights. It just might be a little bit more staggered, right? There might be a couple nights here and there where a guy like Kyrie Irving has a lot more shots and assumes more usage, rides that hot hand, because he is kind of that kind of player now, alongside Luka that can pop off and take possessions and take the game over in his hands if needed and give Luka a rest. But as far as scoring wise, yeah, sure, it might dip here or there. I don't think overall it's going to be anything crazy. I think the peripherals will still be fine. As far as rebounding and assists goes, they like to get Luka some rebounds to start the, possessions in his hands anyway. So kind of like the same thing that, Will, you were saying with Kyrie. I think it'll be the same with Luka. I don't think it impacts him too much, but something's got to give, I suppose. There's one ball and there's these 2 great players, but they're both going to still assume so much usage. Even though they are on the same team, they're still both going to be providing a lot of fantasy production.
Yeah, and just from an NBA kind of rotation standpoint, I think we might see a lot of what we saw with the Mavs with a guy like Brunson, right, where there was a lot of, staggered, rotations with those guys. Obviously they will start and play together a ton, but, as far as rotations are concerned, we'll have stretches where it's, Kyrie is kind of the focal point, then it's Luka in a different rotation there. So I wouldn't freak out too much. That's kind of the main thing we want to say about these 2 guys. I still think they will replicate where their value is perceived right now. Obviously, for Kyrie's fantasy value compared to how scary it might have been if he was still on the Nets through the trade deadline and what that could have turned into. So I guess if you're a Kyrie fantasy manager, just count your lucky stars there. Next up here, I want to talk about Spencer Dinwiddie, who I think is kind of an interesting aspect of this trade, obviously being moved to the Nets. No Kyrie there anymore. I think it's a really good opportunity, especially for this stretch without KD. And I know as far as the timing's concerned with KD being reevaluated, it's pretty positive for him to be, returning soon. But I do want to say, and I don't know any of this confidently, But man, do we really think KD wants to rush back to a team that just traded away Kyrie Irving, who's in the situation they're at? Yeah, it's really a weird spot, because I know as far as where the Nets are from a record standpoint and where everything's at, it's very well possible that KD returns, soon, maybe even before the All-Star break, and does play. But I think there's a possibility. There's a world where it's after the All-Star break, or he doesn't play a regular season game until after that point. So just with that considered, that possibility exists, it could be a really similar situation that we've seen with Dinwiddie without Luka, where it was kind of just him and Christian Wood. And, I like a lot of the other scorers that the Nets have. Obviously guys like, Cam Thomas, who just had a monster game. Seth Curry's a solid shooter. They've got other guys who, will assume some offensive usage. It really feels like Dinwiddie in this return to the Nets could be kind of a prime spot for him to be just a bucket getter and kind of, handle the point duties. I know Ben Simmons is going to return as well, but from a scoring standpoint, I think it's a really good spot for a guy like Dinwiddie, who's played really well over the past couple seasons. So I think from a fantasy perspective, I think you could argue this is actually a really good move for a guy like Dinwiddie, specifically for games without KD. And then when KD returns, there's a world where he's doing the same kind of thing he did for the Mavs alongside Luka. So I think that's a real possibility. Definitely a ton of variance. Obviously, any kind of trades and moves. We've seen a lot of trades where, from a fantasy perspective, things have gone a lot differently than what we've expected. But I think it's a decent spot, specifically with no KD for a guy like Dinwiddie.
Yeah, definitely. And as far as guys like Christian Wood goes, this might be one of the main guys in this, that we mentioned here that really does have probably the biggest hurt to value and impact here, which is really unfortunate because he has had a nice stretch to start the new year here. He's been getting a lot of looks, a lot more usage, but I know it's not a direct impact having a guy like Kyrie come in. Obviously, it's a guard versus a stretch 4 or a 5, but as far as usage goes, Christian Wood's really been stepping up his usage lately, which has really helped his fantasy production. But Kyrie's just going to take a lot of that. That's not to say that, Christian Wood can't have his games. Obviously, there are going to be matchup scenarios for this Mavs team where they run, Kyrie and Luka, and, hey, you still need a big, you still need a stretch guy like Christian Wood who can play very solid for you. But he's just not going to chuck up, 15 to 20 field goal attempts per game like he is this stretch with Kyrie as often. So I do think it hurts his value. I still like Christian Wood. I just think it's gonna be scaled down quite a bit. But with a guy like Kyrie's 30% usage value that he had in Brooklyn, now coming in to the Mavericks with Luka's usage, his usage, sorry Christian Wood, you're just odd man out right now.
Yeah, and I do want to reiterate. I know Kenny had mentioned this as well. I don't think it necessarily kills Christian Wood or any fantasy value. Obviously, any kind of player like Christian Wood, who just naturally in any kind of situation can have games where he shoots a ton of shots, will still have some value. But I think the consistency is the biggest thing, right? We've kind of seen him, towards this midseason stretch. He's been really, really solid versus the beginning of the season, where the minutes were a little weird. He wasn't as involved offensively. I still think he'll have games like that. I just think it's going to be a lot more inconsistent for obvious reasons when you bring in a guy like Kyrie Irving, but I still think he'll have some solid games as well. So he's not like a drop or an overreact or anything. I still think he'll have some value, but not as much, obviously, from a consistency standpoint. And then I do want to mention the other name in the trade, Dorian Finney-Smith. Hey, he's just a don't bother, honestly. There's a ton of other guys on the Nets and even the Mavs as well that I would rather take a stab at from a fantasy perspective. Just these guys that get moved. I know there's a lot of shiny new object and, maybe it's a new opportunity, a new space. KD's going to come back. There's opportunity. It's just there's other offensive weapons that have more upside than a guy like DFS. So he's just kind of a ignore at this point.
Yeah, he's just another Royce O'Neal. I love DFS. He's a dog. He's a great NBA player. But for fantasy, it's just, yeah, exactly. So don't bother. But last up here, the secondary Nets guys are guys like the Cam Thomas, the Seth Curry, the Nick Claxton, the TJ Warrens, right? Kind of the guys that we haven't mentioned for this Brooklyn team. Will, you talked about it a little bit with the Dinwiddie impact. I think, like the usage and impact that Dinwiddie can have with, no Kyrie or even KD being there or not, injured or not, it kind of goes for these guys as well. I think it's kind of a trickle effect. I don't think any one guy is going to assume a ton of usage in this trade for the Nets when KD is out or even when he's back in. We've seen Durant, when he's healthy without Kyrie, to kind of assume a lot of facilitative roles, right? So I think he can really actually help get these secondary Nets guys going a little bit more, and they're just going to need it as a team, right? If they want to stay competitive, they're going to need the guys like Seth Curry and Cam Thomas to shoot efficiently, just like Dinwiddie scoring, right? So Dinwiddie probably is the more dynamic guard, so he will probably get more looks, but there's still like a very much a role for the Currys, the Thomases, the Claxtons to get some shots up, to get some looks. So I actually do kind of like it for these guys as well, just because I don't think all that usage is going to Dinwiddie or Durant when he's back. I think Durant can get others involved very well, and I think Dinwiddie, will shoot and will be have a good bump as the guard play there. But I think it's going to be more of a supporting cast and a more of a team effort to kind of help this team keep winning when it comes to like the guards like that and the secondary guys.
Yeah, definitely. And I do want to say, obviously I have my own opinions about where the Nets are going with a move like this. Obviously Kyrie wanted out, so it makes sense that a move was made by the trade deadline to kind of avoid the free agency situation. They get some future draft capital. We'll kind of see if they have other moves on the horizon, with a guy like KD and, potentially how he feels about this situation. So obviously that's, coming up here, Thursday this week. So, let us know what kind of moves you think are going to happen just overall around the league. But what do you think's happening with KD? Is he on the move? Is he staying? If he stays, is he, gonna, take his sweet time coming back? Wouldn't surprise me, either way, if he does stay out a little bit longer, if he returns. I've been kind of fooled, myself with my predictions on everything. So let us know what you guys think in the comments. Appreciate you guys watching. Kyrie to the Mavs, and it's fun trade deadline season. We'll probably have some other fun trades that are going to happen just in this week. So looking forward to it. Appreciate you guys. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.